So welcome to our first session in our masterclass series for community events. It's really exciting to be working with the three councils who are working in collaboration to deliver a series of masterclasses for events across all three regions. So I just wanted to kick off with a quick introduction. I know we don't have a lot of time on these particular sessions, but what I want to do is just give, I guess, a bit of background context and also a bit of an overview of what to expect over the coming weeks, because as you know, this is a series. So the idea of this is to support events particularly in their planning processes that are required from a local and also a state government perspective. So really giving you some practical insights and also some supporting tools and resources to make that part of event planning a bit easier. I also understand and appreciate that right now it's a really challenging time for events, and it has been for almost 2 years now, dare I say, and it's probably even worse than it was 12 months ago, just with the uncertainty and the fatigue. So I am well aware of that and appreciate that. So sometimes when we start talking about things that are, I guess, not directly related to the current crisis or the current situation, it can be a little bit overwhelming, because all we want right now is answers to the current crisis and a bit of certainty around the future. What my role in these masterclasses is to provide you with some practical insights and some assistance in doing your planning and to effectively do your planning for your event. However, I am more than happy in our question time at the end, if anything else comes to your mind or there's anything else that's really challenging you as an event at the moment, I'm more than happy to open up for some general discussion time at the end. And we can always just, stop the recording at that point and just have a general discussion. And if I can help, I absolutely will. So what I plan to do is run through the content of our session. If you have any questions at any point, pop them into the chat box and we'll address those all at the end and have some open discussion. Before we get stuck into it, just a quick overview. So the masterclass series that we'll be covering off over the next few weeks kicks off today with event management plans. We're also looking then this week at responsible event management. So that's really diving into not just environmental responsibility, but also social responsibility around events and the increasing importance around that and what it means for you moving forward into the future. We'll look at risk management planning, emergency management planning. We'll also dive into marketing and social media, so give some really good insights into how to do that really well. And then we finish on October 20 with a session on event teams and succession planning. And what that looks at is really not necessarily diving into volunteer management, but it's all about how do you create a really good structure around your committee or your event team to ensure that you've got good succession planning opportunities for your event into the future, because I understand that that's one big challenge, not only for events in your regions, but for events across regional Australia. So we're covering lots and lots of different topics over the coming weeks. So if you can, please join us in the live sessions. The live sessions will certainly give you the opportunity to ask questions that are specifically related to your event. And as I said, we'll also have some time for some general discussion. So I guess that's a bit of a bonus for you for committing the time to join the live sessions. But also please just note that all of these sessions are also recorded. So you will actually receive from your council representative details on how to access those recordings. Also, each of our live sessions also have supporting resources. So for example, today we have an event management plan template that's been created predominantly by the three councils with some assistance from myself. So that will also be provided to you with the recording from each sessions. And one final thing, we also, in addition to the live webinars, we'll also do a series of what we've called pre-recorded bite-sized webinars. So these will also be made available to you. They'll only be as a recording, so we're not doing them live. They'll just be really brief, probably 15-minute recordings, and we're covering off on accessible events. We're looking at COVID planning. So we're going to leave that one as long as we possibly can, because as we all know, it's a changing landscape, a bit of a moving feast. So we want to make sure that we've got the most up-to-date information for you around that. We're also going to look at site planning and tips and tricks around site planning. And we're also going to introduce you to the new state government event planner tool. So there's a lot of, I guess, insights, advice, tips, and practical tools coming your way over the next few weeks. So make sure you absorb as much of that as you can. Now, really quickly, just an introduction of who I am. I'm Linda Tillman, and I've been working in regional events across Australia for, it would be getting close to 18 years now. I did start my career in festival and event management, so actually working on the ground, delivering major festivals in regional New South Wales. I'm currently now based in southern Queensland, in Toowoomba, and I now focus my business on strategic planning and capacity building for events and also for destinations. So I work across regional tourism and events. But I do a lot of work for government and also for private enterprise and non-profits, doing a lot of strategic planning, event development work, and a lot of stuff like this. So just sharing knowledge and supporting events to actually put in place systems and processes that make their life a lot easier. And that's where Revents Academy was born. It was essentially me taking all of the learnings, I guess, that I had gathered over so many years and putting it into a really pragmatic model to be able to share with other festival and event committees across regional Australia. My passion is regions, so everything that I do is focused on regions. I love supporting regional communities, regional cities, and probably my favourite is smaller rural communities. So everything I do in Revents Academy is really about simplifying and streamlining the planning process for events, so putting in place systems and processes. And I guess that's what this is about over the next few weeks with our masterclass series, is to try to I guess break down those preconceived ideas about the challenges around running an event. I totally know how much time is required and how much energy is required. But I also know that if we can put in place good systems and processes, it makes your job easier and you don't have to keep, replicating things on an annual basis. You've actually got more time to put into the creative and the fun aspects of running an event, which most community event organisers really are there to do. So with Revents Academy, we cover all areas, and some of these areas we're covering with you over the next few weeks. But essentially, I break an event down into 10 simple steps. And I always kind of have a little bit of an internal giggle when I say simple. But it is really 10 steps. And if we can follow these 10 steps in our planning process, it will just help us streamline and make things so much easier. And it also supports succession planning, which is such a big challenge for smaller regional community events. So it goes through everything from post-event review through to marketing, logistics and preparation. So it covers off on everything. All right, what are we focusing on today? Event management planning. As I said, at the end of each session, you'll be supplied with a resource or a template that's going to assist you in what I cover off in each of these live webinars. So please feel free to take notes, scribble down ideas, but also know that you'll get a recording of this and you'll also get a great tool that will help you implement everything that I talk about. So if you don't take notes, don't be too concerned. So what are we going to cover today? Understanding your responsibilities as event organisers. We're also going to look at what we need to cover in our event management plan. We're going to look at tips in how to complete your event management plan. I'm going to talk about different types of insurances and permits. And I appreciate that, permits can differ and often differ between different council areas. So I'm just going to touch on those and give you, I guess, some key questions to consider or to ask yourself to understand what permits and licenses you may require, because sometimes that can be a bit overwhelming. And then I'll just touch on some supporting documents and plans that you may want to consider as part of your event management plan. All right, what I'd love you to do as I get started in delivering this content, I want you just to have a think about these couple of points. And I would love you to share it in the chat box. I'd love you to jump in the chat box, introduce yourself, because we have got event organisers from 3 of the different council areas joining us today. So it would be wonderful for you to jump in the chat box, introduce yourself, who you are, what event you're representing, and what council area you're from. And also, if you could just answer these 2 questions. Do you have an event management plan for your event? And I'm also wanting to know, are you comfortable with your permit requirements? And I'm going to come back to these points when we get to the question and answer time towards the end of our session today. So have a little think about that and jump into the chat box and share your responses. And also, as I said at the start, if anything jumps into your mind as we're talking through the content this afternoon, please pop it into the chat box, because often you get to the end and we start to ask, you know, has anyone got any questions, and you forget what those questions are. So don't be scared to just drop those in, or any comments or any points that you want me to dive a bit deeper into, please drop them into the chat box. Okay. So you have the fun job of organising your event. You may be the president, the chairperson, the event director, the event coordinator. You may just be a representative on the committee of your event. Whatever role you play, it's really important for us to understand our role as event organisers or as part of a team organising an event. And when we're looking at event management planning, this is all about the operational, logistical, health and safety elements of your event. It's the nuts and bolts, essentially, of your event. So it's really important to understand, if we're jumping on a team or a committee to help organise an event, what are we actually signing up for? What are our responsibilities in that role? So as a team, you're responsible for informing your local authority of your event. And I just want to say, you know, I also do a lot of event strategies for councils. So I work across all different aspects of events, which is really cool, because it means that I've got a really good appreciation of both angles. So from a local government perspective, even state government, but also from the event organisers' perspective. And I know that event organisers get frustrated with their local council and their local authorities, because there's always this expectation to do some paperwork, right? And we get a little bit annoyed by that, because all we want to do as event organisers is the fun stuff. We want to plan our event. We want to deliver our event. We want to make people happy. And then all of a sudden we find that we're having to complete, you know, permits and license applications and event management plans, and having meetings with councils and the local police. And I wish I could say that, you know, there's an easy way to do that, or there's a way around that, because I know that that can be quite overwhelming sometimes. Unfortunately, there isn't a way around it. It's just essential. And councils there and your authorities are there to actually make sure that you are delivering a safe event. So what we need to do is work in collaboration with our local authorities. And my biggest tip to you, and I'm probably jumping the gun here a bit because this comes towards the end, but my biggest tip for you is to start the process and the conversations early, because most of the frustration comes when we're, you know, 6 weeks out from our event and we go, oh no, we haven't talked to council about traffic management. I mean, I'd hate to think that you leave that to 6 weeks before the event, but just an example, you know, you get to 6 weeks out and you realise you've then got to start this, you know, regulatory process, and you get cranky, you get frustrated, you know, and it's really easy to just go, council's making us do this stuff. So remember that council's doing this for a reason. But also I will say, if there are things that your council is asking you to do that you feel is not relevant to your event, it's always good to feed that information back to them as well, because I've also seen, on the other hand, that sometimes councils do have standard procedures and processes for all events that could be streamlined or simplified somewhat, but they don't know how to improve that unless you tell them. So make sure that if there are things that you think could be done better or streamlined or made easier from your perspective, always feed that information back to council as well. All right, point 1, informing your local authority. You're also responsible to seek permission from the relevant landowner. So wherever you're holding your event, that's your responsibility. Your responsibility is to submit the relevant documentation to your local authority, and as I was saying before, in a timely manner. Ensure the overall safety of your event as far as reasonably practicable. So making sure that your event is completely safe, ensuring that health and safety arrangements are in place. And as I said earlier, we're going to cover off on risk management planning, emergency management planning, because it is so critical. We're also going to look at COVIDsafe planning, the new, I guess, compliance factor for all of us moving forward. You're also responsible to ensure the competence of staff at your event. So you need to make sure that staff, whether they're paid, whether they're volunteer, whether they're third-party contractors, you need to make sure that they have, the skill level, the experience and the capability to undertake their roles safely. You're responsible to check all insurance documents, risk assessments, and also methods of work. So any contractors, stall holders, caterers, so any of those third-party providers that are coming on site to deliver something for your event, even though they're delivering it, it is still your responsibility to make sure that they are doing it properly and in a safe manner. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more when I touch on insurance. And I guess most importantly, you're responsible for the health, safety and welfare of all members of your team, any contractors, and I guess absolutely for members of the public attending your event. And you're also responsible to make sure people have a great time, right? That's what festivals and events are about. And we want to make sure that people can enjoy themselves in a safe way. Seen too many disasters at events, and it doesn't need to happen. All right, so what do we cover in the event management plan? I would guess that the majority of you would have an event management plan of some nature. Essentially, what the event management plan does is it brings together all of the safety and all of the operational and organisational aspects of your event. So it puts everything in one place. So what it means is once you've got all of that together in an event management plan, it then means that you have all of that in one spot and you don't have to go and keep finding information for different departments or authorities that may request it. It's a really good tool for you to share with council, with the police, with emergency services, so that everybody has a really good appreciation of your event and they can also see that you've considered everything for your event. So the bigger the event and or the riskier the activities within the event, the more detailed the plan is going to be. So there's not necessarily a one size fits all. And as you'll see with the template that's been created, it's your responsibility to go through that template to determine whether elements of that are relevant to your event. So you need to customize that. So as you can see on the screen, it's pretty straightforward. Or you should have all of this information already. And if you don't, it's a really good prompt for you to sit down and consider these aspects. Your event details, your venue details. You want to make sure that you've got all of your insurance details included. You need to look at things like how will you manage traffic and pedestrians. You need to look at risk and emergency management. And as I said, we're going to cover off that in detail. And then there's big requirement in your event management plan around public health matters. So it does consider things like toilets, your food and bev, waste, noise, first aid, all of those public health matters. It should also outline your licenses and permits. Keep all of it in that one location. It'll have your communications plan and also your emergency and event contact details. But as I said, depending on how big your event is and or how risky the activities within your event will determine how much you include. You might put other aspects into your event management plan. You might only have a very simplified event management plan. It really depends on the size and the risk level. Okay, what I want to do now is just have a look at a few of these areas in a little more detail. So a couple of areas that are quite critical in terms of event management planning. I won't go through every aspect of the event management plan because we just don't have the time to do that. And as I've said multiple times, you'll get a copy of the template and that steps you through all of the areas. Also, we have a masterclass dedicated to risk management and also emergency management. So we won't go into that today because we'll just duplicate. But I do want to make sure that you understand that they're key elements of the event management plan. And we're also doing a bite-sized session on site planning and COVIDsafe planning. So keep an eye out for those. So it's almost like everything that we cover across this masterclass series will feed into your event management plan. So this is like your master document, a really key document for you to bring all of these different elements together. And the great thing about it, because a lot of events and event committees that I work with, they, when I talk to them about creating an event management plan or a risk management plan or a COVIDsafe plan or a marketing action plan, they're like, oh, I don't have time to create these documents. I've got to, organize this or organize that. And they're really, I guess, torn between having the time to do these things well and being able to dedicate the time to actually planning and delivering their event. One thing I always tell them is if you do this now and you dedicate the time to doing it well, it saves you hours and hours of time in the future. And I know that's often a hard sell because we kind of think about now. But it's really important to remember this is not something you have to create from scratch every year. So get this document set up, have it saved in a good shared filing system, and then you're able to just fine tune things as necessary. And you've got all of that there, which also means it's great for succession planning. So if members of the team or yourself decide that your time is up with the event and you have to hand it over to somebody else to take over the reins of the event, it means that they can easily jump in, have a look at the event management plan, the supporting documents, and they've got everything really handy. Okay, traffic, parking, and pedestrians. I've identified this as a really key element of an event management plan, and it absolutely does depend on where your event is held. The reason I've identified this as a key aspect of an event management plan is because it is, or can be, a really high risk aspect of managing an event. Have you noticed, and I've actually been very fortunate just in the last few weeks to attend our local festival here, which is the Toowoomba Carnival of Flowers. And that was lovely. And I'm very grateful for that, being in Queensland, that we're able to attend these events in a COVID-safe manner. But it's always really interesting to watch how when people go to a festival or to an event, doesn't matter how large or small it is, we kind of get into, I call it festival mode, where we walk around, just enjoying ourselves, and we don't pay much attention to hazards. We don't pay much attention to traffic because we actually have a lot of roads closed often with events. So we just think we can walk across roads, right? So it's so important for us as event organisers to really think about how we're managing pedestrians, how we manage traffic and parking. So it can be quite high risk. I actually worked with an event in northern New South Wales. It was like on the border of New South Wales and Queensland. And we had an operations coordinator that was a volunteer, and he was so thorough. He had a traffic management plan. He had parking plans. He knew where he was going to put disabled parking and coach parking and pedestrian access, and, you know, super detailed. One thing he didn't consider is how many cars would come on a one-way road, which seems really silly, right? In hindsight, you go, why didn't that get considered? So this event was on a farm in a rural part of, as I said, that border country of New South Wales and Queensland. And essentially you had to drive up off a main road onto a secondary rural road up to this farm, and then they were exiting on the other side of the farm and coming out. So it was a two-way road, but it ended up becoming one way. This festival became so popular this particular year, there was traffic. I would say, I mean, I remember being up on the festival site and looking down, because it was elevated, looking down for as far as the eye could see, you could see congestion of traffic. It was pretty overwhelming. It would have been, as far as I could see, 20 kilometres of back-to-back cars. And that was something he hadn't considered, you know, put so much detail into everything else, but hadn't considered how to manage that massive influx of vehicles wanting to get into a site. So traffic, parking and pedestrians is so important for you to consider. And it's that detail, right? We're always thinking about, what about this? What if that happened? How do we handle that? I always recommend with any aspect of an event, actually, and we'll talk about this in event teams, I always talk about breaking your event into small chunks. But particularly for areas like this, you should aim to have a committee member responsible for managing traffic, parking and pedestrians. So they're dedicated to that particular role. They can work really closely with council. They can work really closely with emergency services. If they engage someone like SES to help with traffic management, they can work closely with them. So always look to engage a committee member to be solely responsible for that particular area. So depending on the location of your event, a traffic management plan may be required, but you'll just need to talk to council about that, because it does depend on your location. In most instances, you can work on a traffic management plan yourself. If it's a larger event that's a lot more complex, maybe a bit riskier from a traffic and a pedestrian perspective, then there are external companies that can actually assist in the development of these plans. Activities that occur on roads, road reserves, or anything that will affect the normal flow of traffic. So the classic is, you know, street parades, races on roads, they all require a permit, usually from council. You might need one also from Vic Roads or Vic Police, depending on the level of the roads that are closed. So you need to really think about all of the activities across your event to determine the implications on traffic. You need to think about parking, and you need to think about parking not just from a must-have point of view. You want to make it user-friendly as well, because that can be a real pain point for your attendees. So really put yourself in your attendees' shoes here and think about the parking. You know, will there be enough parking? If there's not a lot of space for parking, how are you going to actually encourage people to do things like carpool or use public transport? But you've also got to think about things like disability parking. You know, will you have coaches coming to the event, and do you need to consider coach parking? So there's a whole range of things for you to consider around parking, and all of this goes into your event management plan. So you can see it's just answering all of these questions and thinking through. And often It's taking what's in your mind and putting it into your event management plan so that the next person that comes along or another committee member that comes along and has to implement something knows exactly what needs to happen. And then finally, you have to consider that flow of foot traffic. As I said, we get into this, what I refer to as festival mode when we are attending an event, and we don't often pay attention to traffic signs, not a lot really. I mean, you think about when people come to your event, it can sometimes be a little bit chaotic, but I don't know, I do it myself. So make sure that you're thinking about that flow of foot traffic. Where do you need pedestrian access? Where do you need some, SES workers to help manage the flow of vehicles? So always thinking about that. And also you need to factor in, the vehicles on site, because that can be another high risk area when we talk about managing traffic. It's not just traffic coming in to the event, it's also traffic on site in terms of bump in and bump out of your events. So making sure that you've got really tight controls around the timing of that to make sure you don't have any overlap of the gates opening and there's still a few vehicles or forklifts or buggies driving around the event site and increasing the public safety risk. So traffic, parking and pedestrians, that's just one area for you to consider with your event management plan. Another key area in the event management plan relates to public health. Now, this covers everything from food and bev, hygiene, through to things like waste and toilets and noise. It's your responsibility as an event organiser, as I've said, to ensure the health, safety and welfare of all staff, volunteers, contractors and attendees. So that's where this aspect comes into play. This aspect also considers, the health and welfare of local residents as well. So it also considers the impact that your event may have on local residents and how you're going to manage that. Obviously, council wants to make sure that you've got this area covered off well for obvious reasons. And once again, depending on the size of your event, will determine how much goes into this area of your event management plan. So a few areas you need to think about, and most of you should be familiar with this, but I just want to bring it to your attention. And in the actual template that we've created, there's also some great resources and links to help you identify requirements around these different aspects. So once again, don't feel like you need to take too many notes. It's all really detailed within that template. Food and bev is a big one. So when we talk about public health, we obviously want to make sure that we don't have anybody leaving with food poisoning or any kind of drastic health challenges or issues around our food service on site. So in Victoria, all food premises have to have a Food Act registration before they can sell food, and that does include temporary and mobile food premises. So make sure that you've considered that for your event if you've got food and beverage on site. Street Trader is a good tool for you to use. So that's the online registration database. And once again, we've put detail of that into the template so that you've got access to that. But that's a cool online tool. We don't have that in Queensland. It's excellent. It's an excellent resource for Victoria. It allows you to apply for your registration for your Food Act. You can manage your registration. It's essentially an online portal to be able to manage all of your registrations and lodgements for your events, which is really, really handy. Then we have alcohol. So if you are intending to sell or supply any alcohol at your event, then obviously a liquor license must be obtained. And you'll also usually require approval from council. I always recommend you start this process as early as possible. You know what, for any of this stuff, you want to get all of your licenses, approvals, permits, get it done as early as you can. Get it out of the way. Don't leave anything to the last minute and risk that really stressful period. You need to focus your time on delivering the event and making sure that you've got everything in order for your event as you get closer. You don't want to find yourself having to do, a license or an application for something. So try to do it at least 3 to 4 months before your event, if not 6 to 8 months before. You also need to be mindful when you're selling any alcohol is that you will typically have to have segregated areas if you've got an all ages event. So once again, council or the Commission for Gambling and Liquor Regulation can assist you in planning all of that, and we'll also touch on that when we look at site planning a little bit later. Water is important, so you must have sufficient supply of freely available water. The cool thing for you guys is you have water trailers available for hire in your region. The other thing is waste, and I'm not going to touch on waste too much now because we will talk about that quite a bit on Wednesday when we talk about responsible events. But I guess in terms of your event management plan, you do need to think about how many bins you require. You need to think about how your waste is going to be managed on site, how it will be removed, who's the supplier. You need to also think about recycling and how you're going to reduce waste at your event. Noise. Look, noise is really important, particularly when we talk about music festivals or anything that has music amplifiers or generators, or even just large crowds of people congregating, particularly in a residential area. So we need to be able to monitor the level of noise produced, and we need to minimise that disruption to our nearby residents and businesses. So council will want to see in your event management plan that you've factored in noise. How much noise will you have? What time will you end that, music or loud component of your event? So make sure that you're considering noise. And also, there's so many other aspects you can consider in terms of public health, and this is really for you to determine based on what you offer at your event. There's a really handy guide. It's the Victorian Guidelines for Planning Safe Public Events, and we've put the link to that in the actual template that you'll be provided, because that steps through a whole range of other areas that you need to consider that may be relevant to your event. So it looks at things like amusement rides, fireworks, animal welfare if you have animals involved at your event, things like temporary structures. We've all seen those horror stories of, the jumping castles not being tied down properly and go flying with children in them. They're things that need to be considered as well in terms of event management planning and risk management. Things like motorsports, if you've got motorsports, there's different aspects that needs to be considered from a public health point of view. So there's a whole range of other things that you will just need to look at for your event. And for many of you, they may not be relevant, but you may find that some of them are, and you just need to address that. It doesn't need to be, a hugely detailed area in your event management plan. It's just acknowledging it and talking about let's use fireworks, for example. You would talk about who's your provider, what you want to make sure that you've listed their license details, their insurance details, when the fireworks will happen, who's managing the fireworks, what safety precautions have you got in place, and just a quick snapshot of that. Now, insurance. This is a bit mind-boggling for events, and now we've even got this whole conversation around COVID insurance. So it's a bit of a minefield when we talk about insurance requirements for events. And I guess my biggest recommendation is that you do seek professional advice to ensure that your event has adequate insurance cover. So when you're looking at insurance, you need to be thinking about insurance that protects spectators. If you've got participants, if it's a competition event, then you've got volunteers and staff, you've got officials, you've got the organising committee. So there's a whole range of different, I guess, people that are involved in an event that need certain levels of cover and protection. You also need to be really mindful of your suppliers as well. And like I said before, any of those third-party providers that are coming on site to, you know, set up at your event, provide services, you know, it could be stall holders, you know, carnival rides, anyone providing any other service or product on site at your event, you are legally responsible to make sure that they have appropriate insurance cover as well. So just make sure you have that. And often council will ask for copies of those to have on file as well. So it just covers you and it covers council in case anything does happen with your event. But as you can see on the screen, there's a whole range of different types of insurance that you may consider for your event. Public liability would be an essential, and that covers any accidental injury to members of the public at the festival and third-party property damage. Then you go into things like there's adverse weather. So these are things that are perhaps not compulsory for you to have for your event, but once again, you may seek professional advice to determine which of these would be best suited to your event. And you've got to weigh up the cost as well, because the cost of some of these can be quite high. So adverse weather insurance typically covers against the cancellation of a festival due to adverse weather conditions. Then you have volunteer insurance or workers' compensation. So that covers against any costs which arise due to a member of staff, a volunteer, or any helper at your festival or event getting hurt. So it's a typical workers' compensation, and a lot of events like to offer that as a bit of a selling point to volunteers because, you know, they, I guess, want to know that if they're volunteering their time at your event, that they have some kind of insurance cover or protection in case they do get injured. Cancellation insurance. So this is different to wet weather or adverse weather insurance. If your festival is cancelled due to any unavoidable reasons, then any costs incurred can actually be claimed through this cancellation insurance. However, as we've seen, this does not cover things like COVID-19 or any crisis of that nature. And just while I'm on that, if anyone is interested, this Friday, there's actually an event chat taking place at 11 a.m. and I can share the details. I'll pop it in the chat when we get to the Q&A session, but it's a Friday event chat that's being hosted every fortnight, and this fortnight they're talking about COVID insurance, and they've got a range of different event organisers and also different event associations joining to talk about that conversation. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about COVID insurance and that challenging conversation, join in on Friday, and I'll share the details shortly. Then there's things like property and equipment insurance, and then, as I said, vendors or contractors. So it is really important that you obtain certificates of insurance from all of those third-party providers. And you also want to make sure, and usually council will specify this, you want to make sure that any of their insurance certificates actually name the event as an interested party. And sometimes council will ask to have them also listed as an interested party to make sure that that's covered on their policy. So what you want to do with your event management plan is make sure you include your copies of all of your insurance policies within that event management plan. So it's all there. And you'll also see in the template that's provided, it gives you the opportunity to just put in the key details of your insurance as well. Permit requirements. This can be a bit of a headache for event organisers, but it's absolutely essential to consider what licences or permits you need to deliver on your event. And this is where a conversation early in the planning stages with council can actually really assist you to make sure that you know what permits or licenses are required and you can get stuck into it early. As I said at the start, every council is slightly different. So make sure that you connect with that relevant staff member, and remember that they are there to help you. Majority of councils, and certainly all of the councils that I've ever worked with, they engage someone like me because they want to support their events. They want to enable their events to happen. So they are there to help. So make sure you start those conversations really early. Now, look, these are just some questions to ask yourself. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but just to give you a bit of I guess, something to think about in terms of permit requirements. These are the things that council staff may even ask you these questions. We've certainly addressed these in the template that we've provided with you to give you a bit of insight into what may be required. But things like, will your event change the use of a road or a footpath? If so, there's possibly local laws that apply. Sometimes it could be a state road, so then there might be state laws that apply and therefore permits that are required. Will alcohol be served? We've talked about that. Will food be served? In most cases for those, you'll need a temporary liquor license and a food license. Will you have stall holders? Will the event be amplifying sound or creating loud noise? That could be, a matter for Environmental Protection Agency. Will there be temporary structures? Once again, we've touched on that. Things like marquees, grandstands, jumping castles. That's when things like a place of public entertainment could be required. If you're using gas or extension cords, they've got to be tested and tagged. If there's rides, you'll usually require local council approvals. Fireworks will often require WorkSafe Victoria notifications. So as you can see, when you start to look at all of these points, it really starts to identify what permits are required. So ask yourself these questions, start the process early and get your permits done. And once again, once you've been through the application process, council can make it easier for you in future years. You don't always have to start from scratch. There may be some instances where documentation has changed and yes, you'll need to, but always keep copies of everything on file, everything in your event management plan. And then in future years, all you need to do is come back and update that. All right, supporting documents. So as you can see, this is quite a hefty document by now. You've got lots of information. It's got a lot of that nuts and bolts and how to and operational and logistic aspects of your event. But what I also want to suggest is that you have a whole heap of supporting documents with the event management plan. And this means that everything's in the one place. You don't necessarily have to have this as a hard copy document because you will want to change it and update it all the time. But if you've got a file in a shared filing system for your event that has event management plan, and you can have all of these separate documents just filed within that folder, it just keeps everything together and will make things easier. So whenever you have to apply for a license or a permit, or you've got a meeting with an authority, bam, it's all there. You don't have to go looking for stuff. And that can save so much time. So things like your risk assessment or your risk management plan, your emergency management plan, any permits that are required need to be attached to your event management plan. If you need the place of public entertainment permit, include all of that with your event management plan, your traffic management plan, anything around waste, all of that can sit with your event management plan as your master plan for your event. All right. we're just about out of time, and I do want to allow some time to go back through the Q&A and answer any questions. Just to wrap up on event management planning, a few practical tips for when you're completing your event management plan. Don't forget that it is a working document. Don't feel like you have to recreate things all the time. Like I just said, keep it as a soft copy on file. It doesn't have to be printed, you know, in a folder like we used to do. Keep it all online in a folder that you can actually just update regularly. So if there's a little bit of something that changes, you know, in terms of maybe how many toilets are required at your event, you can just go in and change that in the document. So it's a live document, what we refer to as a WIP, which is a work in progress. Always treat it as a work in progress. It should always be up to date. Start working on it early, and don't feel like you have to have it complete all at once. You might actually just build on it as you go. So you might just set up the template that we provide you, put in the information that you can, and then as you're having meetings, you know, with different authorities or different partners or whoever it may be, you can just continue to add detail into your event management plan. By the end of a 12-month period, I guarantee you'll have an event management plan complete. And then, as I said, it's just a matter of then tweaking and updating and keeping it current. Share the load amongst different roles. So don't feel like if you're the president, for example, or a key member of the committee, it's not all your responsibility to complete the event management plan. So break it up. You know, there might be somebody that looks after traffic and pedestrians, as I said, let them complete that section. So it's not necessarily one person that has to do this. It is a good succession planning tool, so please use it as that. So you want to share it with your committee. Make sure everybody's aware of it. Make sure everyone's familiar. And when you're recruiting for new volunteers, or you're looking at, a changeover of event organisers or presidents, this is a really good tool to share with them to show that you've got everything in order. You're an organised, efficient, well-oiled machine. Also, don't duplicate. So one great thing is once you've got everything in your event management plan, you can just pull pieces out of that and you can use it to do other permits. You can use it to create your COVID plan. You can use it to, do a grant application. You can draw on all of the content within that event management plan to repurpose it for other uses. As I said, council is there as your friend to enable your event. Work with them and work with them early, and you'll see good outcomes and results. It's about building that relationship. And don't be afraid to ask for help, whether that is asking council for help, whether it's another local event organiser that may be able to help you with something. Always ask for help when you need it, because I guess one of the things that I've learned, particularly through this period of COVID, is that the events industry is so willing to share and support one another. So I encourage you all to ask questions, support one another, share information, whatever you can to help all of your events to be a success. And that's everything from me in terms of the event management plan. What I'll do now is I'm just going to jump into the chat and see if there's any specific questions, but I'm also happy to open up and let people unmute themselves and ask any questions that they may have about event management planning. If it's stuff specifically related to local laws, for example, I may not be able to answer the detail. So I may have to refer you to your council representative, but I'll certainly do my best. But also, as I said at the start, if there's any questions you have or things you want to discuss about events, I'm happy for you to throw that on the table as well, and we'll see if we can flesh that out a little bit. I'm just looking in the chat box. permits bogging you down? Look, it's a challenge. If I was to say what are the key challenges facing events, and mind you, I work with regional events across all of Australia. So I'm constantly engaging with different events of all size and scale. And we often have those conversations about, you know, what are your biggest challenges? What's holding you back? What are your frustrations? They would usually be, if I was to sum it up, it's probably three things. One would be volunteers, having enough volunteers, keeping volunteers for more than a year, getting younger volunteers. So volunteers. The second one would be dollars, being financially viable. And the third one would be compliance, you know, the increasing compliance on events. That's why it's so important to actually put in place event management plans and good systems and processes to try to streamline it as much as possible, because it's not going away. So we need to try to make it easier for ourselves. I can't see any questions. Oh, thanks, Nicole. Nicole's put that link. If you haven't seen that, Nicole has dropped a link for the Victorian guidelines for planning safe public events into the chat box. But as I said, we've also got that in the template for you. Kathy has asked, is the template provided for the event management plan the same template used or required by Macedon Ranges Shire Council? Kathy, we certainly have taken that as a basis of the template, but we've also added in different elements based on my experience and from the other councils as well. Well, that's a good question, Vivian. So Vivian from Lancefield Neighbourhood House has asked, so they run the show, they've been running the show for decades, and this may be a question for council. So they've been using the surrounding streets for parking, which has been the case for other events held at the park as well. She's asked, can we continue this way? If not, can a traffic management plan be shared by all the events which use the park? I love the idea of doing things once, you know, so if there's an opportunity to share or do something for a location, obviously that would be great. I'm not sure if any of our council team...
Nicole's just has responded a bit to that, just saying that unless there's parking restrictions, normal road rules apply.
Yeah.
Would mean that we wouldn't have to.
Yes, she has.
Yeah, so I have questioned this in the past too with our local laws, but where there's no parking restrictions, no standing or timed parking, normal road rules apply. And if people are experiencing issues with people parking across their driveway or parking illegally, then it's a police matter. But on saying that, you know, it is your event, and working communication with community members and the police around what's happening and where people, you know, are probably going to park is going to help your relations and support from the community.
Mm.
And sometimes, so I was going to say, sometimes that might be having traffic cones that someone can put in the centre of their driveway or something so that people can see them. Because I know the streets you're talking about, Vivian, that sometimes it might not be clear to someone who's not familiar with the area.
I hope that helps, Vivian. Okay, that looks like all the questions in the chat box. Has anyone got anything else that they would like to discuss today?